Hi everyone, how are you all doing? Welcome back to the channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Bruno Villas, and I share real criminal cases here on the internet. And if you're just arriving here now and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, I invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss notifications, because that way every time I publish a new video, YouTube will notify you and you can come watch it with me. I also invite you to follow me on social media because there I'm always interacting with you. But now let's get to what matters and let's go to today's case. Before we start today's case, I want to give you a warning. This video has a documentary nature and was produced using information available on the internet, which has been compiled into a video. The purpose of this documentary is not to shock anyone, much less to disrespect the people involved in the case. I also want to take this moment to warn everyone that in today's case, we will be discussing incestuous relationships, and various types of abuse, both physical and psychological. Therefore, balsogals. I recommend caution and will leave a pinned comment below with a playlist of criminal cases where people sensitive to this topic can find cases with themes and stories completely different from today's subject. And for those who will stay with me until the end of this case, today we will understand everything that happened to Little Paige and why her life story left the community completely moved. There are several different ways to start telling today's case, but I think we should begin by talking about the terrible tragedy that struck the family. We will now go back to the year 2017, more precisely. May 2017. On May 15th, 2017, an emergency call was made to the authorities. The address provided by the caller indicated a village called Guthrie Center. Guthrie Center, folks, is a city in Guthrie County in the U.S. state of Iowa, along the Sophie-Racon River. It is a very calm and peaceful village where the population of just over 1,500 inhabitants lives in peace and harmony with each other and also with nature. And all this tranquility was abruptly interrupted by a desperate call, urgently requesting a fire truck because the fire was consuming everything very, very quickly. As soon as the firefighters arrived at number 1005 on the main road, they were met with a desperate scene. The fire had indeed taken over everything. The firefighters took more than 15 hours to fully control the fire. Paramedics also quickly arrived at the scene, and police authorities were at the residence's address to assess the situation. A few hours later, this terrible accident was making headlines in all the local newspapers. Initially, everyone believed it was a terrible twist of fate, which didn't make much sense because the residence had all its fire prevention systems working perfectly. A few hours later, the consequences of the terrible fire were made public. Melanie Paige Exline, a smiling little girl of just 12 years old, and her cousin named Shakya Cochran, 16 years old, died as a result of the disaster. Everyone in that house was sleeping when the fire started. Sometime later, the forensic paramedics indicated that the girls died minutes before being reached by the flames. What happened is that they died because they inhaled all the toxic smoke released by the flames. Additionally, both had more than 70% of their bodies completely burned. Two other people were sleeping peacefully in their rooms when the fire started. One of them was the girl's grandmother, a lady named Shirley Exline, 74 years old, who had minor injuries. She even tried to rescue her granddaughters, but she couldn't get close to the room because the hallway leading to it was engulfed in very, very high flames. A few minutes later, an explosion threw the lady out of the house through a window. The other resident was the girl's uncle, therefore Shirley's son, named William Long, 54 years old. Although he managed to be rescued still alive, he suffered third and fourth degree burns on a large part of the upper region of his body, and even had to undergo several knee surgeries and was subjected to long and painful treatments. Although it's quite normal for grandchildren to sleep over at their grandparents' house, the investigators wanted to know why the girls were in that house during the fire. Initially, as I already mentioned, that scenario seemed to fit a terrible random accident, because even after thorough preliminary analyses, nothing indicated an arson. But strangely, the girl's grandmother, Mrs. Shirley, began telling everyone that her granddaughters had been murdered. Shirley had raised Shakya since childhood and had been appointed as the guardian of little Paige in March 2017. She also takes care of her middle-aged son, William, who had a brain tumor. The investigators then decided to understand the circumstances of all that, and that's when a bizarre story began to take shape. The first thing that needs to be said is that little Paige was born and spent most of her short life in Greene County, which is a city that belongs to Jefferson County, still in the state of Iowa. Although she was living in the same state, the little girl was almost 50 kilometers away from home, and the officers wanted to understand why. Melanie Page Exline was described by her teachers and friends as a sweet, cheerful, and very vibrant girl. She was very communicative and loved animals. She wanted to adopt every animal she saw and campaigned for people to adopt dogs, cats, and so on. She always said that when she grew up, she would be a veterinarian and also a great activist for animal causes and all those things. Paige, folks, was the youngest among 3 siblings. She had a brother 7 years older named Noah Dwayne Exline, and a sister 5 years older named Cheyenne Exline. It turns out that when she was about 8 years old, her parents ended up separating, and I didn't find much detailed information about the girl's mother. I can't tell you what happened to her or where she has been all these years. What is known is that Paige went to live with her father, named James Exline, her brother Noah, and her sister Cheyenne in the odd house of James's new wife, a woman named Christine Thompson. This woman then became the definitive stepmother of the 3 siblings, and she herself already had a son from another marriage, a young man named Patrick Ryan Thompson. So to sum it up for you, living in that house were James Handy with his 3 children, House Paige, Cheyenne, and Noah, and also James's new girlfriend, Christine, with her son, Thomas, who was the oldest of them all. At that time, he was already 23 years old. It turns out that things started to get a bit strange between Paige and her brother Noah. I won't beat around the bush, and will just say that he started to violate his little sister when she was only 9 years old. She didn't quite understand what was happening and how he made threats about keeping it a secret and so on. She ended up staying silent for many, many years. The years went by, and finally 2 years later, when the victim was 11 years old, their father, James, discovered that his son was taking advantage of his little sister. He was very angry and explained to his son that he was the man of that family and that his son should never touch the little girl again. As unbelievable as it may seem, he himself began to abuse the girl. In other words, the role of the abuser had to be his, right? The father forbade the son from approaching the girl, and he himself began to do horrible things to her. Well, in the meantime, Thomas left home and moved to the state of Nevada. Well, the fact is that when she was 12 years old, Paige took a threatening action towards her family. She was attending a class at school, and after talking with her sister and her school friends, she decided to tell about the abuse she suffered from her father, and also about how her brother violated her when she was only 9 years old. The girl's stepmother, Christine, caused a huge scandal and said that the girl was crazy, a liar. She also said that nothing wrong happened, and that if something did happen, it was because the girl wanted it, because she was forward and blah, 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 you know? Well, 2 lawsuits were filed, and that was the reason why the girl was sent to live with her grandmother, Shirley. She was appointed by the court to testify both in the case against her father and in the case against her older brother, who, at that point, was about to turn 19 and had recently left home to live with his half-brother, Thomas, who, as we already know, was in the state of Nevada. But these testimonies, folks, never happened, because as I mentioned at the beginning of the story, the girl passed away in a terrible fire that occurred on May 15th, 2017. From that point on, it was all downhill. This case became a tangle of shocking discoveries, lawsuits everywhere, lawyers and prosecutors yelling at each other, police investigators knocking on many doors, and I'm going to tell you in a way that makes sense, although I can say that nothing makes much sense. In this case, okay, it seems like a bunch of crazy people gathered in the same place. I have no idea what's going on in these people's minds, but you'll understand soon. Well, a major investigation began, various testimonies were collected, security cameras analyzed, electronics examined, and even a fire department report was issued. As a result, in August 2017, 3 people were arrested. James and Patrick were charged with connection to the arson and homicide. As for Noah, he admitted to abusing his sister, but we'll talk about him shortly. Let's start then with James Hubert Exline Jr., who, for those who don't remember, is Paige's father, and at the time of her death, he was turning 45 years old. Investigations revealed that, in fact, he was never a good person, you know? That's because almost 10 years earlier, back in 2008, James Exline was accused of abusing 2 little girls. He appeared in court and pleaded guilty to both charges. In the end, he never went to prison because he made a deal with the prosecution and agreed to be registered as a sex offender. He agreed to keep his distance from the 2 victims and also never to work in jobs that involved any kind of contact with minors. He agreed to these and some other requirements in exchange for probation. That is, both Paige's biological mother and the girl's stepmother, Christine, always knew that the man was a convicted criminal. But it's that thing, right, folks? There are women who like to get involved with people who are no good. Well, everyone has the freedom to choose what they want to experience for themselves, right? Although I find it very strange, I won't judge anyone. Well, James was accused by the prosecution of being connected to the fire that claimed his daughter's life, with the sole purpose of preventing her from testifying against him in court. The trial was scheduled for January 2018, but it was postponed to May because one of the defense attorneys left the case. The May trial also didn't happen because the defense demanded that Shirley, the victim's grandmother, not testify during the trial. And this happened because she was the defendant's mother and was telling everyone that her granddaughters had been murdered. The defense team believed that the desperate woman could destabilize the jury, and even taint it, as a mother testifying against her own son is not something you see regularly. Shirley continued to say that her granddaughters had been murdered, and even spoke to journalists. Therefore, James's defense requested that she be arrested for contempt of a court decision. Of course, that did not happen, And finally, James's trial began in June 2018. The prosecution presented all the available evidence they had, such as witnesses who heard Paige recount how her father abused her, as well as testimonies from doctors, psychologists, teachers, etc. And finally, the jury withdrew for their deliberations. On August 6, 2018, James Exline was found guilty of all charges against him, and the judge presiding over the trial sentenced him to a total of 75 years in prison, with at least 64 years to be served before eligibility for parole. The judge stated in his ruling that the man was extremely dangerous and harmful to society, and that the best course of action was to keep him away from people for as long as possible. As I was saying, in August 2017, Patrick Ray Thompson was also arrested. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of arson. But the prosecution had quite a bit of work to prove what they were claiming. And I will first talk about everything the prosecutors presented and then the defense's arguments. Okay, Thomas's trial began at the end of September 2018, and for 11 consecutive days, a battle was waged in the courtroom. The prosecutor said that it was Patrick who started the arson. He got along very well with his stepfather James and knew that his mother truly loved the man. By this point, we already understand that the woman didn't like her husband's daughters. And since Patrick was very close to his mother, he began to hate the girls as well. Kind of automatically, you know? Well, the prosecution lawyers told the jury that the accused did this to solve his stepfather's problems, and also to finally make his mother happy with the man she loved. According to the prosecution's report, on Mother's Day, which happened a day before the fire, Patrick and his half-brother Noah gathered at James and his wife's house to spend Mother's Day with the family. It was at this moment that Patrick and his stepfather James finalized the last details of the attack. The prosecution called Noah himself to the witness stand. Yes, folks, he testified against his half-brother. He said he saw his father and his half-brother talking in secret, but he didn't want to interfere to find out what they were discussing. He only overheard a moment when one of them said that something needed to be done to stop her. Noah also recounted another quite curious fact in court. Patrick had told investigators in his first statement that he left the family house at 10:30 that night and returned to his apartment in Nevada around midnight. But Noah testified that, in fact, his half-brother asked him to confirm this story because it wasn't the truth. Noah said that, in reality, his brother arrived home in the early hours of the next day, and not at the previous midnight. To confirm this allegation, the prosecution presented footage from the highway security cameras, which recorded all of Patrick's movements. He was on a motorcycle and arrived in Nevada around 3 in the morning. The prosecutors also brought the fire department agents to the witness stand. They said that after detailed analyses conducted in the days following the fire, it was possible to determine that the fire was intentional, likely started with an open flame and a flammable liquid, such as pure gasoline, for example. The technical experts presented evidence that a month before the fire, Patrick sent a text message to his mother, and this message, folks, said something like, "Death to all the," followed by an expletive that I won't repeat here, okay? Well, the message ends by saying something about mind games, and the prosecutors claimed that he was referring to Paige and implying that she was making unfair accusations and playing mind games with the family. In another text message, he told his mother that killing attracted him and that the idea of deaths made him feel very good. A few hours later, he sent a message to James where he declared that he was ready and trained to do what needed to be done, the experts also presented a message that the accused sent to his stepfather talking about sabotaging Shirley's car so that she and her granddaughter couldn't attend the hearing. That preliminary hearing, folks, which was scheduled to take place at the Iowa Department of Human Services. Before concluding the prosecution's arguments, folks, I need to say that Noah also mentioned that on the day of the fire, but already during the day, Patrick had called him and asked him to bring his helmet, gloves, and also his suit to the apartment of an older colleague of his who lived nearby. Noah said he smelled gasoline on the items and asked why the guy was telling him to do that. And Patrick supposedly responded that it was an order from his older brother, and he was just supposed to obey it. Patrick Thompson did not testify at the trial. His defense began the speech by saying that no witness saw their client at the scene of the fire or even near the crime scene. The defense proudly stated that the entire prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence. The lawyers said that all the family's relationship problems by themselves were not enough to prove that the accused had started the fire. One of the lawyers, named Erica Nichols Cook, even accused the firefighters, claiming that they had not conducted a thorough and complete investigation. She categorically claimed that the report was wrong about the start of the fire. She explained to the jury that Shirley had a habit of smoking and that a cigarette could have been left lit, also pointing out issues like extension cords and others that, according to her theory, could have been the causes of an accidental fire. The defense also claimed that Patrick was not in the city where the tragedy occurred that day, and that the prosecutors were being pressured by the media to solve the deaths, which led them to draw hasty conclusions, and they wanted someone to blame. According to the professionals, the messages the accused had sent to his mother and stepfather were sent while he was drunk at a bar table and had nothing to do with Paige, let alone setting anything on fire. Regarding the message about sabotaging Shirley's car, the lawyers said that what matters is that no car was sabotaged. And I'm going to open a parenthesis here. You see, because the fire happened 4 days before the preliminary hearing, meaning Shirley's car wasn't sabotaged. Not because Patrick had given up on doing it, but because Paige died before attending that hearing. Well, to wrap it up perfectly, the lawyers attacked Mrs. Shirley. They questioned her about a fire that happened 35 years ago and had claimed the life of her first husband. At that time, she had received compensation from the insurance company, and there was a lingering feeling that the lawyers were insinuating that Shirley had set her own house on fire, with her sick son and her granddaughters inside, just to claim the home insurance. There was an awkward atmosphere in the courtroom, and it seems that the move backfired because the jurors were quite uncomfortable with this insinuation. I think I may have already mentioned to you, but the trial lasted a total of 11 days of intense exchanges of accusations, and in the end, after just over 2 hours of deliberation, on October 8, 2018, the jury found Patrick Ray Thompson, 27 years old, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. The verdict brought immense relief to all the family members, and the media reported the decision as a great victory for justice for Paige and also for her cousin Shakya. The district court judge named Brad McCall sentenced Patrick Thompson to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge accepted the jury's recommendation and wrote in his ruling that there was no doubt that the young man orchestrated the arson with the intention of preventing Paige from testifying against her attackers. And last but not least, we have the victim's brother, Noah. He was also arrested but charged with assaulting the girl. He pleaded guilty to it. He admitted that he had relations with her when she was still a minor, and that later He stopped the abuse when his father forbade him from having contact with the girl. As we already know, he also stated that he had nothing to do with the plot to set Shirley's house on fire, and agreed to testify for the prosecution and tell everything he knew about his stepmother, his father, and his half-brother. Since he was also a minor when the abuses occurred, his sentence was quite different. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and in March 2019, there was a parole hearing, and Noah was released under the conditions of not working in any activities involving children, in addition to registering as a sexual predator. And in this specific case, the prosecutor explained that if he violates these or any other conditions, he will automatically return to prison again. As always, I want to end this case by asking how you feel and what you think about all of this. Many people were questioning the stepmother. Why didn't they properly investigate Patrick's mother? Didn't Christine already know what her son was willing to do? How far was he willing to go? It seems to me like those cases I talk about here on the channel, where teenagers find out that a classmate is going to do something horrible, but no one does anything. No one informs the police. And on the other hand, there are journalists who raise questions about Noah. Did he really have no involvement in the fire? After all, he was as interested in the girl's silence as his father was. All right, he already knew that his sentence would be lighter, especially since his father would be tried as an adult, and he as a minor. So is it really true that he had nothing to do with the fire? Or did he have something to do with it, but was covered up? Well, what do you all think about this? I have no doubt that Patrick did what he was accused of. Otherwise, there would be no reason for him to have lied about several things. But did he really act alone? Well, leave in the comments what you all think about all of this. I find these cases, that involve family to be horrible. In fact, I just shared a case about a granddaughter who took her own grandmother's life, left her grandmother rotting in the room for 2 months, living with the grandmother's corpse, and spending all her money throwing various parties. And if you haven't watched that case yet, I'll leave a pinned link below along with the playlist of criminal cases, okay? In the comments. But that's it, folks. If you stayed with me until now, don't forget to leave your like, which really helps in promoting the channel. I'll stop here. Kisses to all of you, and see you in the next video.